Sarah Mitchell had been scanning barcodes at Food Mart on Route 7 for 3 years, just another invisible face in suburban Virginia's endless strip malls. Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee-stained uniform, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the familiar beep of products sliding across glass. But when 2 armed men burst through automatic doors at 9:47 a.m., everything changed. The first gunman barely managed to shout his demands before Sarah moved with lethal precision that belonged in a war zone, not aisle 5. She disarmed him using techniques that defied her minimum wage reality. Her sleeve rolled up during the struggle, revealing something that would trigger alarms across the Pentagon. The tattoo was small but unmistakable. A black eagle clutching arrows, wings spread in perfect symmetry, etched with the kind of precision that spoke of military significance. To terrified customers calling 911, it looked like typical ink. But to certain people in classified Washington corridors, that eagle represented something that officially never existed. The symbol belonged to shadows within shadows, operations so compartmentalized that acknowledging their existence could topple governments. Sarah had just exposed herself to a world she thought she'd left behind forever, a world that had supposedly died with her 7 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan. Within 40 minutes of the police report hitting federal databases, 3 separate agencies simultaneously flagged Sarah Mitchell's name. The problem wasn't her heroic actions or even the mysterious tattoo. The problem was that according to every official record maintained by the United States government, Sarah Mitchell had died 7 years ago in a helicopter crash over Afghanistan's Hindu Kush mountains. Yet here she was, alive, apparently living under her real identity in plain sight, working at a grocery store 15 miles from the Pentagon. The contradiction sent shockwaves through intelligence networks that prided themselves on knowing everything about everyone who mattered to national security. The tattoo scanner at Quantico's analysis division went into immediate overdrive as specialists tried to match the eagle design against classified databases spanning decades of military operations. When they found it, the classification level was so astronomically high that only 12 people in the entire federal government possessed clearance to view it. The symbol belonged to something called Operation Nightingale, a unit so secretive that even its existence was compartmentalized beyond top-secret classifications. The kind of program that had no paper trails, no official acknowledgement, no congressional oversight. The kind that died with its operators, leaving no witnesses to uncomfortable truths. Detective Ray Kowalski had investigated everything from domestic disputes to organized crime during his 23 years with Fairfax County Police, but nothing prepared him for the federal response to what should have been a simple armed robbery report. Agents descended on his crime scene within hours, their credentials carrying the kind of weight that made his captain immediately deferential and strangely nervous. They interviewed Sarah with professional courtesy that barely concealed intense scrutiny, asking oddly specific questions about her background, her training, her knowledge of military procedures, her familiarity with classified operations. She answered with practiced deflection, claiming the tattoo came from a rebellious college phase she'd rather forget. But her combat response told a completely different story. Security footage revealed movements that belonged to someone trained in close-quarters combat, threat assessment, tactical positioning under extreme pressure. The way she swept corners with her eyes, automatically positioned herself with clear sight lines to all exits, maintained situational awareness, even while seemingly focused on neutralizing immediate threats. These weren't skills learned in community college self-defense classes or picked up from action movies during weekend binges. These were reflexes burned into muscle memory through repetition, discipline, and real-world application under circumstances where hesitation meant death. The federal agents left with copies of everything: witness statements, security footage, photographs of Sarah's tattoo taken from multiple angles with professional equipment. Within hours, that evidence mysteriously disappeared from the county's storage facility. The hard drives containing backup footage suffered simultaneous corruption that IT specialists couldn't explain. Even Detective Kowalski's handwritten notes vanished from his locked desk drawer. Someone with extraordinary reach and unlimited resources was systematically erasing any trace of the incident, as if the robbery had never happened, as if Sarah Mitchell had never revealed herself to the watching world. Meanwhile, at CIA headquarters in Langley, analyst Jennifer Cross was pulling threads that led deeper into classified compartments with each database search. Operation Nightingale appeared only in fragments across different systems, never complete, never fully accessible to any single analyst, regardless of clearance level. What she could piece together painted a disturbing picture of an elite insertion team tasked with operations so sensitive they required total deniability from the American government. Missions that couldn't exist on paper, couldn't generate after-action reports, couldn't leave survivors who might someday testify before congressional committees asking uncomfortable questions about American foreign policy. The unit's official history ended abruptly on November 15, 2018, with a helicopter crash in Afghanistan's most hostile territory. All 6 personnel listed as killed in action, bodies never recovered due to immediate Taliban control of the crash site. The crash report was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access, the mission parameters redacted beyond recognition, the very existence of the team buried under classification stamps that would remain sealed for 75 years. Except now, apparently, one of them was scanning groceries in suburban Virginia, very much alive and completely unaware of the international storm she'd just unleashed with a single heroic act. Cross dug deeper into military personnel records, searching for training programs that could produce such precise combat responses under stress. What she found instead were gaps, deliberate omissions, classification stamps requiring permissions that didn't exist in any government database she could access. Every lead pointed toward a ghost program that someone had taken extraordinary measures to bury completely. The kind of operation that existed in the spaces between official policy and operational necessity, where America's most deniable assets carried out missions that could never be acknowledged by any administration, regardless of political party or moral considerations. Frame-by-frame analysis of the Food Mart security footage revealed details that made Cross's hands shake as she compiled her increasingly classified report. Sarah's scars were consistent with repelling injuries sustained during urban warfare operations. Her movement patterns suggested extensive training in close-quarters combat and tactical shooting. Her weapon handling showed familiarity with military firearms that a civilian grocery store employee shouldn't possess. Most telling were her eyes. Constant scanning for threats, automatic threat assessment of every person entering her field of vision, the hypervigilance of someone who'd survived environments where relaxing attention for even seconds could mean immediate death. The psychological profile emerging from the footage analysis painted a picture of someone living with post-traumatic stress, carefully managed through routine and isolation. Sarah's apartment was Spartan, arranged with sightlines to all entrances, no personal photographs or memorabilia that might connect her to a past she was trying to forget. Her work schedule was rigid, her social interactions minimal, her lifestyle designed to avoid attention or recognition. She was hiding in plain sight, camouflaged by the invisibility that comes with minimum wage employment in suburban America, where nobody looks closely at the people scanning their groceries. At the Pentagon, General Marcus Webb received a classified briefing that made his blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. Operation Nightingale wasn't just classified. It was supposed to be dead and buried, along with everyone who knew about its existence. The unit had been created during the height of the War on Terror for operations that couldn't leave American fingerprints, couldn't generate paper trails that might embarrass future administrations, couldn't exist in any form that congressional investigators could discover during their periodic oversight hearings. They were America's most deniable assets, trained for missions where failure meant complete disavowal and capture meant immediate execution to prevent intelligence compromise. The helicopter crash in Afghanistan had been convenient, perhaps too convenient, allowing the Pentagon to officially terminate a program that had become politically radioactive. Congressional oversight was increasing. Investigative journalists were asking uncomfortable questions about cross-border operations, and several allied nations were filing formal complaints about activities that violated international law and diplomatic agreements. Nightingale's death provided a clean ending to a very dirty chapter in American covert operations. The classified memorial service had been attended by exactly 3 people, none of whom spoke a word about what the unit had actually accomplished during its brief, violent existence. But Sarah's survival presented problems that reached far beyond simple classification breaches or embarrassing congressional hearings. Cross had uncovered a pattern that made her question everything she thought she knew about government security and operational cleanup procedures. 5 other former Nightingale operatives had died under suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years. Car accidents that looked too perfect to be accidental, home invasions where nothing valuable was stolen, apparent suicides by people with no history of depression or mental health issues. The pattern only became visible when viewed through the lens of operational security and the kind of cleanup operations that governments preferred not to discuss in official channels. Each death had been investigated by local authorities and closed quickly without federal involvement. The car accidents involved single vehicles on empty roads, drivers who supposedly fell asleep at the wheel despite having no history of fatigue-related incidents. The home invasions targeted people who lived alone, occurred during brief windows when neighbors wouldn't notice anything unusual, left no forensic evidence of struggle or resistance. The suicides happened in ways that left no forensic evidence of coercion, used methods that suggested familiarity with the victims, personal habits and psychological profiles, professional work, the kind that required extensive resources, careful planning, and complete invisibility from law enforcement oversight. The systematic elimination suggested someone was tying up loose ends with extreme prejudice, using techniques that required government-level resources and intelligence capabilities. Cross realized she was looking at evidence of a shadow operation designed to erase every trace of Nightingale's existence, including the people who had carried out its missions. The question was whether this cleanup was authorized by official channels or being conducted by elements operating outside government oversight, using Nightingale's own methods against its former operatives to ensure permanent silence about activities that could destabilize American foreign policy if exposed. The truth, when it finally emerged through channels so classified they required biometric verification and real-time monitoring, was worse than anyone imagined. Operation Nightingale hadn't ended with that helicopter crash in Afghanistan. It had simply evolved, gone deeper underground, funded through black budgets that existed in the spaces between official oversight and operational necessity. The original military unit had been replaced by contractors, foreign operatives, and assets with no legal connection to the United States government, but every practical connection to its most sensitive operations in denied areas around the globe. Webb realized with growing horror that Sarah hadn't been hiding from the government. The government had been hiding her, keeping her alive and unaware, while systematically eliminating everyone else who knew what Nightingale had actually accomplished. The suburban life, the cashier job, even the apartment on Maple Street, all of it carefully constructed, monitored, and maintained by handlers who ensured she remained invisible to hostile intelligence services. She was the last living repository of information that could expose not just Nightingale, but the entire shadow network that had grown from its operational ashes, spreading across continents and involving allies who couldn't afford to have their participation exposed. The contractor network that had replaced Nightingale still needed someone who knew the original protocols, the safe house locations, the extraction procedures, and the communication methods that only authentic operatives possessed. Sarah's handlers had kept her close but ignorant, a resource to be preserved until needed for operations that might require her specific knowledge and training. But preservation required complete isolation, and isolation required the systematic elimination of anyone who might recognize her, remember her, or piece together what she represented to ongoing classified operations. The convenience store robbery had shattered that carefully maintained invisibility in the most public way possible. Cross discovered that the cleanup operation had accelerated dramatically in the past 72 hours. Communications intercepts showed increased chatter among contractor networks, financial transfers to offshore accounts associated with elimination operations, and movement of assets toward the Washington metropolitan area. Sarah's exposure had triggered protocols designed to contain security breaches at any cost, including the elimination of assets who could no longer be protected through conventional means. The woman who thought she was living anonymously in suburban Virginia had become the center of a covert war that most of the government didn't even know was being fought. The final piece fell into place when Cross accessed NSA communications intercepts from hostile intelligence services. Foreign agencies had been searching for Nightingale survivors for years, offering substantial bounties for any information about the unit's operations. Russian SVR, Chinese MSS, Iranian Quds Force, North Korean Reconnaissance General Bureau, all of them wanted to know what America's most secret operatives had accomplished during their brief, violent existence. The systematic elimination of former team members wasn't just about keeping governmental secrets. It was about preventing those secrets from being sold to hostile nations who would use them to expose American intelligence networks operating in their territories. Sarah's public exposure had essentially painted a target on her back that every enemy intelligence service could now see clearly through their own surveillance networks monitoring American domestic activities. The eagle tattoo that had seemed like such a small detail during the robbery was actually a death sentence broadcast to facial recognition systems across the globe. Surveillance footage from the convenience store was already being analyzed by adversaries who'd been searching for exactly this kind of breakthrough, this opportunity to capture someone who could provide operational details about America's most classified activities. International intelligence networks were mobilizing resources towards suburban Virginia, preparing to either capture or eliminate Sarah before American handlers could relocate her to a more secure environment. The cashier who'd saved a convenience store from armed robbery had just become the most hunted person in America, targeted simultaneously by her own government and every foreign intelligence service with the resources to mount operations on American soil. She was now valuable enough to justify risking international incidents, diplomatic crises, and open intelligence warfare in the suburbs of the nation's capital. As Sarah returned to work the following morning, completely unaware that her life had been irreversibly compromised by a single moment of heroic instinct, black SUVs were positioning themselves around Food Mart's parking lot. The occupants weren't there to protect her from foreign agents or domestic terrorists. They were there to contain a situation that threatened operations spanning multiple continents and decades of carefully constructed deniability. The question wasn't whether she would disappear again. It was whether she would survive the next 24 hours long enough to understand why she'd been kept alive while everyone else she'd ever served with had been systematically eliminated. The Pentagon had created a weapon so effective they couldn't afford to destroy it, and so dangerous they couldn't afford to let it operate freely in a world where every government wanted to know what America was really doing behind the curtain of national security. Sarah Mitchell thought she was just trying to survive another minimum wage shift, scanning barcodes and making change for customers who treated her like part of the furniture. But somewhere in classified corridors of power, people were making calculations about acceptable losses, operational necessities, and the price of keeping America's darkest secrets buried forever beneath layers of bureaucratic deniability. The cashier, who'd become an accidental hero, had just 12 hours before her past caught up with her present, before the world she'd tried to forget came looking for the skills she'd never really lost. And she still didn't know why everyone she'd ever served with was dead, or that she was about to join them, unless she could remember how to be the weapon they'd trained her to become 7 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan.